morning, Nichole. Thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me. I appreciate that. Can you tell us about your background and how you become interested in trauma-informed identity coaching and holistic practices?
Sure. So my background, I actually spent 20 years in business management consulting, where I focused on change and transformation, which has elements as it relates to people, right? Helping people with adopt and deal with change. So just naturally, I've always been interested in people and how people operate. My formal background actually is in psychology. So I have a bachelor's in psychology. So through that process, I've always been connected. But as far as getting deep into trauma work and understanding how we basically tick, that happened as a result of me losing my mother, actually before then. So my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and I took care of my mother until she passed. During that process, I became very curious more about the mind, body, spirit, right? It as a connected entity, I guess us as collectively what's happening with us. And so it took me down a path of curiosity as it relates to our mental states, our mental capacities, our emotions, but also just energetically what's happening. And so through that process, I became certified in several different modalities, hypnotherapy, energy healing, other elements of health coaching, things of that nature. And what really shifted me into the trauma work is as I started working with clients when I left corporate America and starting to realize there was something deeper occurring than just, I don't want to achieve I can't achieve my goals, or I can't move forward in this area. And so I started studying more around trauma, the effects of trauma, and our ability not only to develop, but navigate the world. So that's what's led me to where I am today, and really focusing on being trauma informed, understanding the impacts that trauma can have to our ability to be able to show up in the world that we authentically desire to show up.
And I can imagine trauma, especially when you say you lost your mom. So sometimes also that can come with grief as well, where losing someone very close, especially you spend the past few years just taking care of your mom, and then now it's like gone. So what else do you do?
Yeah.
What's next? And
And to that end, so my mom, my mother I lost my mother rapidly. So I didn't know at the time with her diagnosis, but my mother passed away within 4.5 months of her diagnosis.
Wow.
So this was very extreme. And to your point, from not only the experience of the diagnosis, but being a caretaker and being part of the process of actually watching my mother pass away was very traumatic. And so that's another thing that I realized right through this process is that not only do we have grief in losing a loved one, but it's all of the elements that go along with it, right? And as you were just kind of talking through, the grief element too is, I think, bigger and bolder than many times we actually talk about, right? And there can be such a delay in when those experiences and occurrences happen in our lives. And so me learning also to have a level of compassion and care for myself and going through that. I'm just now at a state where I can talk about the loss of my mother and it not have such a visceral response. But I gave myself that time and space to do that.
Permission to heal.
Yes, permission to heal, permission to be curious, permission to not do things on someone else's timetable. All of those wonderful things, because we all deal with trauma, tragedy, transitions in different ways.
Exactly. And also, I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
And I'm grateful, but I'm also very grateful that you are able to not allowing yourself to be in the dark space for a very long time. Because I know when I lost my grandfather, I did allow that to happen for at least 2 years. And trust me, for me, I felt like the world was darkness at that moment. It's like that person, very important from childhood to my adulthood, and now just gone. And I think it took me 2 years to not to get over it, but to say that it's okay, because he's still here with me, just not impersonally here with me. So that takes me a few years. And I'm grateful to see when other women are able to not let it go, but to say it's okay. for me to not having that person here with me every single day.
Yes. And something that you mentioned that was so powerful, like you say, it took 2 years, right? I would say for me, probably year 3. And I think this is the other thing, right? Is that we live in a society that kind of looks at grief as at the moment, right? And then the rest of the world goes on. And that's where I sense the isolation can come from, the guilt to even be dealing and processing. And I think that's the greatest opportunity we have, is also to give people permission to go through that grief journey in the way that it best serves them. And for us to ask, how can I serve you over a point in time? Because it may not be the first 3 months. It could be a year and a half that it really hits you. You know, so I love and honor that you gave yourself that space too. And it's so important, I think, that we start having conversations about loss and grief in a different way. I mean, I was talking to someone recently and we were talking about bereavement in corporate America, right? So for some people, there is no bereavement opportunities. And then it's like 4 days. And you're
what
like,
what are you doing 4 days?
You basically lost a loved one. You have to plan, and then you have to go back to life. So when we think about just the construct of dealing with someone that we've lost, there's a major opportunity for us to reevaluate that.
Not only that, for me, even I remember for me, when my sister called me that morning, said grandpa passed away, and I didn't believe it. I was still joking, laughing, I'm like, yeah, that's not true. Yeah, whatever.
Shock is a phase, right?
It's like, okay, sis, you want to see me? I'll come see you, okay? We'll hang out. So I get dressed. I went and see my sister. Still, she's crying. But for me, it's like, yeah, my grandpa is fine.
And denial is real.
I denied it even the day of the funeral. Like, literally, my grandpa is laying in front of me. I'm still denying it. He's fine. Yeah. He's alive. It's fine. Yeah. That was me.
So thank you for sharing.
So it's kind of like those things, I think, that, like you said, having someone that went through it and be able to go help others get through it. And I think it's important. But also that bring me to a point, you spend 20 years in your career, you walk away from that career, and you start your own company. So now can you tell us a little bit about Nichole Lee Global LLC? What is it about and how do you help people?
Sure. So I had my company around 2015, but I was working part-time. So I was certified as a life coach. I think it was 2015. So even as part of my corporate career in consulting, I did some coaching components of that. And so I always had it kind of lingering there, right? And like I said, I did some things part-time when I had the availability, but I left corporate technically in 2020 and then became full-time 2021 in my business, okay? And what I focus on is holistic healing, health, and wellness from the focal point of helping individuals with their identity. And what I mean by that, right, is that we have oftentimes actually attach ourselves to certain identities, even being a woman of color, being from a certain country, these things. But what happens, and even belief systems and cultures, but what happens after a while, we don't necessarily know who we really are. We know who we are tied to these identities and how they show up in the world and what people expect us to be. So the work I do is helping people truly get back to who they are and using holistic methods to do that, looking at the mind, body, emotions, and spirit as a collective human being to figure out who you are, what you desire, and how you want to show up in the world. Many times people look at that as, what's my purpose? I had the who am I question. Or when we talk about transitions, right? So even for me, leaving a 20-year career behind where my identity was this consultant, traveling, hardcore 24/7, to then leave that, to decondition elements of that, I was like, who am I really? I had become a lot of what other people wanted me to be, but I wasn't really sure of who I was. So me going through that process is why I now focus on that. And that is my mission for other people.
So now when you say that you help them find identity, don't get me wrong, because since I was a kid, I was born to, you Black, you're a woman.
Yeah.
your family love this. They follow this religion, and they do this, they do that, and this is who you are, right?
That's who you are.
So,
yep.
Yeah, but now when you say that you help them to find their true self, so your entire life you've been telling you are ABC. Now you're telling me I'm not ABC. I need to find something else. So how exactly you make that process work for someone to go find that? Because that's hard.
And it is. And so like part of it is the awakening of what we're talking. Awareness is the first step. We have gotten so conditioned to be on autopilot that people aren't even aware of how many identities they truly attach to that actually drive their behaviors. So the first step is actually starting to look at all of the things you identify with so you can actually have an inventory. And when you do that, you're like, wow, part of what sometimes comes up is now wonder I'm overwhelmed. Now wonder I feel I'm a fake. Now wonder I feel isolated, because you start to literally see you're wearing all of these masks and trying to keep them all together is literally paralyzing you in some states, right? So that's one. The other is actually I spend time with my clients of actually asking over and over again who they are. There's an exercise I go through in a comforting, safe space, because that's why it's really important too, right? You have to feel safe to just sit and be and say, who am I? Who am I? Some of it is closing the eyes because the outside world you want to be stimulated, right? So if I asked you who you are now, you more than likely will go to the attributes, because the outside world is how you connect to them. But if I have you ask you to close your eyes and really just be in that space, your intuition, words come up. I'm fun. I'm exciting. I'm passionate. I love dogs. We were talking about your son. Like, I love animals. I love plants. I love dancing. All these things. And so when you go through that exercise and then you go at all the identities you've actually been holding on to, you see a disconnect. Typically, that's where we start. And you'll see that the identities that you've been holding so strongly to are out of alignment of who you are, what you really enjoy at the core. So if we can get that level of awareness, then we can start working through what drove that, what influences, what cultural aspects, what people in your life, all of those things, to then start slowly, because sometimes it needs to be slow, not rapid, right? To start to see themes and patterns of how you lost yourself. And what are the things around you that are either reinforcing, rewarding, or supporting those behaviors that either don't serve you or serve you. And then we just start working from there. But I call it unpacking, right? We've got to unpack the things. We've been carrying a lot of stuff, and there's stuff in our bags that we didn't even realize were there until we start putting them up on a board. So that's really where I start, because that can be very eye-opening, right? And actually start to connect clients too of where they see the connect or disconnect in their lives. So for example, right, if you're a super carefree, creative, vivacious, you love being spontaneous, and you're in a finance role where you're responsible for calculating numbers all the time and accuracy and risk and very low creativity, and you're someone who does that for 70 hours a week, you wonder why there's a disconnect in your life. Doesn't mean that that's not part of you, but it's probably not the authentic, full expression of you.
Wow. I can imagine. I would love to see you go to a session with someone and see the whole process.
We can even do a process. Yeah, because even that, like I would say, anyone's like doing that, going and once again, it's a safety thing, because I will add, right, so much of the outside world, especially as we become adults, tells us not to explore, not to experiment, not to be curious, right? So to ask yourself why in a way that's not judgmental is very foreign to people.
Yes.
Right? So that's the other part, is start small, write a few things on the list. right? Ask friends that you trust and love to be like, when you see me in my greatest essence, who am I? They will tell you. And sometimes you have to start with people outside of you that you love and trust, because seeing it for yourself is difficult.
That's true.
So that's another way. If I have a client that's like, ooh, this, right? Like, who are some of your people that are your Fab Five that you love, that you really respect and honor their perspective of you? Ask them the question.
You'll be
and
surprised.
Even that light bulbs go off. And it creates a level of connection and power that I think sometimes we just need to feel like we're filled up. So many people are feeling depleted. So just even doing that and having someone pour into you, which many times we're not used to, right, is another thing about it as well.
Do you think that COVID-19 kind of make it even worse? Going through the pandemic?
Yes. So, I mean, we went through collective PTSD, right? Post-traumatic stress means that there's a stress that we're all trying to work through that has created a disorganized, disharmony, dis-ease, whatever word you want to have. And I think we all were going through our own elements of suffering, isolation, disconnection, and questioning. And then it was all of a sudden like, the lights are back on, go back to life, right?
Just like
we
that.
talk about trauma that none of us, now I won't say none of us, many of us did not have the opportunity to process because the world said, okay, now we're open. So yes, that did breed a lot. I mean, I left during COVID. I had other reasons that created that kind of intensity, right, to leave. But yes, people started questioning who they were. People started questioning their relationships. People started questioning where they wanted to even be in the world in life, because when everything shuts down, you have a deeper level of reflection. You don't have distractions.
Do you feel like at this point you had more clients because of the time that they feel like they need more help in that sense?
I would say I had an influx of clients, and I think it also came from such a gap from therapists being available. So though I'm not a therapist, right, be very clear, I'm not a therapist. I don't do the same work as a therapist. However, people were needing that type of connection and someone to talk to in a safe space, right, who did understand things they were going through. Yes. So I did have some clients that were maybe on a waiting list for a therapist and just wanted that connection to someone to work through some of their things emotionally, physically, etc. So with me also being a health coach, we may even start on the mental and physical elements, right? Which then still lead to emotional and some of the other things surfacing. But I did see that uptick where it was like, I can't get in with a therapist and I need support. So I'm going to hire a coach. Or I'm in the process of working with a therapist and I still want this kind of outside support and connection because it's different work, right? So I want the complement of working through some of my past challenges while also being able to pull them through to be able to put them in action. So that's where I did see more of that influx was really from that, the gap, I guess, supply and demand challenges that were happening.
Okay. So very little therapists and too many people need help.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes the thing about this work is I go back to safety a lot because what I've also seen is from a resonance perspective, a relatability perspective, I mean, identity from our race is a thing, right? And so sometimes we don't realize that just the relatability element opens up opportunities to talk about things because I can discuss and talk about things that are different when I'm from that experience. So that was another thing I found is sometimes the supply and demand, whether it was wanting a woman or wanting a Black person to work with or some other, attribute was also creating the challenge of supply and demand.
But one thing, listening to you talking, so walking away from 20 years of a career, probably a well-paid job as well, I can imagine that all the things that you have to go through. So can you discuss the challenges and rewards of making that transition?
Yes. Which would you like first, challenges or rewards?
I think I'll go with the challenges first.
So I will say some of the challenges for me, I would say first was ego. So the fact that I didn't, if I would have left my consulting world and then say be a career coach, it would have been a different transition or shift. It would have been probably a smoother one because people would say, oh, okay, you just took the leap and now you're just doing it on your own. You're a career coach or a leadership coach. The fact that I shifted into a totally different modality, my ego had to be checked at the door. Right. I was at a different level of how I was going to see myself, how I was going to communicate about what I was doing, not, stripping myself from all the titles and experience, all that stuff. So that was one. I think a challenge too, because of the shift I had, there was an element of isolation. So the fact that I took the leap in COVID, so that was already isolation. Then leaving an environment where I was connecting with people all the time was isolation. And then building a business in a different way with a different model was isolation. So me navigating, not having the community and working through my why and how I did everything was, the challenge. And I will say too, it was very interesting. I was a leader. I managed budgets, right? I did pitches and sales. And it was very interesting leaving that world and how much more challenging it was for me to do it for myself. So I think sometimes we think like, oh, we've done it for businesses. It'll just be natural for me to do it in my own business. You talk about a challenge. I had to bookkeep and manage budgets for, God knows how. But to do it for myself, I was like, manage a budget and think about marketing costs and clients and all the things I have been doing for a company for the longest. And I was literally struggling with that. And it is a different, like I say, because I was shifting the networking, my structure, those types of things. So I would say those were the main challenges. And then once again, just communicating that with people, right? You're rebranding after 20 years and your brand is literally you. It's one thing in the environment I was in. Yes, my brand was part of it, but I was an extension of a very large brand. I worked for very large consulting companies, right? So I was an extension. Now for that to be just little old me, it's a totally different dynamic of how you present yourself, how you show up in the world. So yeah, I had to work through that.
So what was the rewards?
The rewards, freedom. Freedom. Like I say, a lot of the deconditioning, deprogramming, my freedom of literally, who am I? How do I want to show up? What do I want to do? Who do I want to connect with? Do I want to work with this person or not work with this person? Do I want to communicate? Do I want to get up this early or not? I mean, that freedom of literal choice and decision on who I was that was the ultimate piece. I am truly free to be who I am, and I will accept all consequences, rewards, and all the things, right, in that space. The other reward is fulfillment. I am truly fulfilled. I know that I'm aligned to what I was called to do, how I serve every day that I wake up. I know that I'm in that alignment, and that is the most fulfilling experience I could have. We talked about death. If I died tomorrow, my soul would be at peace, and I know that. And then I would say a different level of connection. So because I even think of our connection, right? Because of this different energy, because of how I'm showing up in the world, the people and communities that I'm connecting with are so much more enriching to me. They're so much more impactful to me, and they're so much more aligned to literally me. And so that was the greatest reward. I realized that it wasn't that my connections were inauthentic. When they're so focused on the strategy and, some of the business elements, you lose sight of really connecting with heart-minded, like-minded individuals from an intentionality perspective. So I'm very grateful of my community and connections I've made as a result as well.
Wow. The freedom.
Freedom. I mean, yes, freedom is I won't say probably, freedom is the greatest gift that I have been given. Yes, for sure.
I love it too.
Thank you.
You have a podcast you're launching soon. So,
yes.
Where you will be exploring the power of authenticity and living fulfilling life. Can you tell us about the inspiration behind the podcast and what listeners can expect?
Sure. Yes. So my podcast is Transcending Identity. So it is literally transcending the identities, belief systems, environments that no longer serve you so you can truly be your best self, right? Which includes being authentic, being free, being fulfilled, and having joy and happiness in your life. And so what actually prompted it is I've had these experiences with myself. I've had experience with clients. I've had experience with other individuals that I've come in connection to. And I want to create a safe, transformative space for us to talk about these things from all walks of life. So I will have guests, everything from entrepreneurs to athletes to activists to spiritual leaders, sharing their journey of transformation, transcendence, and their own triumphs, right? And challenges they had to go through to be able to be their best authentic selves, and for us to have a space to be real and vulnerable about these conversations, right? It's great when people have performed and excelled. The intent of this, though, is I desire people to see themselves and have a level of hope and faith to be seen and supported from the podcast. It'll also include me providing meditations and reflections and even guidance and tips and tools from my own experience and just from my practice to share as well. And so it'll be launching next April. The beginning of April will be the official launch.
I cannot wait to listen to the first episode.
I'm excited. Yeah, it's just a different lens on transcendence, right? And like we've talked about, we don't realize how many things we identify with. And so it's amazing the stories that will be shared about, releasing that identity to become a new person or releasing an environment to become the person that we're most fulfilled. And, as we know, the more that we're in those spaces, the more we actually come together as a community as a whole, the more that we feel freer to be ourselves and tell our story, the more we actually begin to unite as a human race around the world, because we start to see the connections of those stories in each other. So that's another thing that I hope happens. I will be speaking with people from around the globe. So it's not just the US, so that we can actually see that we're a collective human race that are all desiring to be our best selves and live a happy, joyous life.
It doesn't really matter where you are in the world. We each have deal with the same.
Yeah.
Similar stuff.
We do, right? It may be from our own lens or a different view, but at the end of the day, no one had to teach us the elements expression of feelings or emotions. If you go anywhere and say, what does sadness look like? We'll describe it the same way. What does happiness or joy look like? You don't have to take a picture and say this person was from Germany or South Africa or France when you see a smile on their face to then decode it to say, oh, that means happiness.
It's the same.
Right? So these are the things, we have this common language, right? That we actually have, that we sometimes lose sight of. So,
but can you discuss the importance of trauma-informed coaching and how it plays a role in your holistic approach to coaching and healing people?
Sure. So being trauma informed and understanding the impact of trauma, and really the element too is, I think many times we look at trauma as more severe things that we see, right? Murder, rape, molestation, catastrophic events. I know there was a shooting, right? Like those are traumatic events, not discounting, right? But trauma really is tied to anything that we experience that we're not able to process. So this is something that was very eye-opening to me because as someone who saw these, and I'm using air quotes because major is relative, right? There's a construct that those things are more major than, say, someone who has a traumatic experience, maybe through a surgery or going to the dentist's office or a parent, say, yelling at them, etc. So part of where this is very helpful is recognizing that where we have not processed emotions and events can have a significant impact on our ability to move past them. And so recognizing that as a trauma-informed coach, I have more information and am more equipped to navigate through this and recognize if this is deeper trauma that may even require therapy, right? So sometimes where coaches are not informed and they just keep going down the track of this person's not performing and executing this and not showing up for calls or some of these other things, pressing forward. I have the understanding and knowledge to ask certain questions that help understand, is this something that needs additional support? And I will recommend that, right? Also, with that, there are techniques, because I do work in somatics, where I can support regulating the nervous system, because part of the trauma element, right, is dysregulation. So when we are dysregulated, our body gives us responses, which many, we tie a lot to anxiety, for example, and that fluttering in the system in the heart or the stomach, etc. So if I'm aware of how you're connecting the visceral response to potentially something traumatic that occurred to you, we can work through that very differently if I'm just labeling it anxiety, for example. So I find that all of us have an opportunity to be literally more informed about how trauma shows up in our lives, how it's impacting other people. And there's an amazing book, if it's okay for me to share.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's What Happened to You with Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce. I always forget his last name. But if you look that book up, it's a beautiful book in helping you understand trauma, the experiences of it, what it does for the development of us, even from children through adults, and our ability to be able to navigate the world and the level of resilience that we have to be able to move through situations and environments. And what I love about that is we start to shift from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. Because this is the other part that I will add, is when you start to ask from that place of understanding and compassion, then we actually can get to what happened, right? Something did happen to all of us that created certain belief systems, certain resistances, certain fears in our life. And so if we can start to ask from that lens, then we can start to get to the root of what's occurred. And then we can start to look at strategies and plans to help people get better or to get to the next level or whatever that goal or aspiration that you have.
Wow. I think that's also a very long process as well, because it doesn't really take 2 or 3 days to get over all these things.
And it does depend on the person. So that's the other thing, right? We all process and deal with life events, trauma experiences differently. And so to your point, right, like we were talking about grief, right, and losing a loved one. For some person, depending on what's happened in their life, they may be able to be resilient or move forward differently than someone else. And so if we start asking what happened to you and maybe starting to understand these collective elements, then you can see something may take longer, right? If someone's had severe traumatic experiences since they were a small child, that takes a different level of effort and work and connection and investment than, say, something happened to us at 25 per se, and given maybe all the other evidence that we have to be able to move forward and be resilient and have connections to be able to move through that differently. And I love that you said that, is like starting to really give ourselves the compassion care and permission to discover what that is for us. Because the rest of the world will tell you there's a timetable.
There's always a timetable. There's a timetable right? For everything.
For everything. And you're like, but this is why I believe a lot of people are in the loop in their lives, because there's so much outside of us that tells us that there is a time for us to shift careers. There's a time that we should get over grief. There's a time that we should become a mother, a father, a this, a that. And by the time you try to calculate all of those things, you've lost yourself in the process.
Hey, there's a time to get out of your parents' house. The time is up for you to go to college. Well, don't come back home. You get out of college. Go get your own apartment. There's a time. You should be paying rent. You're 16 now.
I mean, you should be married. I mean, I'm not married, right? I remember. So when are you getting married? I'll be 46. People are still like, so are you, when are you getting married?
Should I be getting married? I didn't know that, but thanks for reminding me.
I didn't know it was a problem. I'm okay with it. I'm not having children. People are like, oh, really? Your eggs? Okay. My eggs are fine. I'm okay with my eggs.
It's okay with my eggs. I boil them every day and I eat them. Right? That's what I will say.
You look at all these things, and that's why I say freedom, right? Like, and it's not to say that anything we do has a consequence, right? Everything. It's a choice of which one you desire, and you build up the courage, which, like you said, over time, to live in that. And you acknowledge and recognize that everyone's not going to be on the journey with you. I think that's probably one of the more difficult things. Like I say, the isolation I didn't mention, but like recognizing certain people may not be on this new journey, and that's really tough.
But for me, I think it's okay, because look at it, even if when you are in business, everyone is not going to be your client.
No.
It's the same in your life. It's the same in your life. You will find even your own family will not agree with you. And that's okay. You are my family. I love you. Don't agree with me. That life is fine.
Yeah. And I would say too, like, the thing that's interesting about doing this work too is, once again, looking at what those patterns and reinforcement we know in certain cultural elements, or, I don't want to go deep, but things like religion or cultural or generational expectations and requirements, right, that make that feel so much more difficult to do. And if there was a belief that you would be ostracized or separated from, right, or cast out, that can feel more painful than for someone to even be in their own freedom, Yes. So just recognizing that all those things that we're talking about and really starting to create the conversations. And I love that you do this, right? Because the more that we have conversations about different things, different empowerment things, you start to see the elements of the stories in yourself, and then you can build the courage. The courage may come outside of you. It actually may, right? Doesn't always. I think there's this thing like you got to have it all inside of you. Sometimes you may have to reach a little bit out to pull it back in.
Yes, I agree with you on that. Yeah. So now, how can someone reach out to you for help, for support?
Oh, great. Yeah. So my website is probably the easiest, and it is www. I'm glad that stayed. The World Wide Web stayed the same. www.Nichole Lee, that's NicholeLee.love, LOVE. Yes, you will always receive love if you come to my site. But that is the easiest way. You can also search for me on LinkedIn, but I think in the show notes or something we'll have that, because there are a lot of Nichole Lees. So I recommend going to my website. That has my Instagram, and there has contact information, everything there. So that's probably the easiest with my name, given the commonality of it.
So now, what are your future plans for your coaching and holistic practice? And how do you see the field evolving to meet the changing needs of individuals seeking personal growth and fulfillment?
Yes. So how I've seen a shift. So like we talked about, I was in the COVID realm, so everything was remote. And that was great, but there's just a different level of connection you can have. So I think from an overall theme and trend, people are looking to be more connected with people, right? Physically. So having a physical space or being able to go to a client, I actually offer that as part of my program. So I was on the East Coast and met with a client in person, and we had a half-day immersion session. So I think that's also something I see is the one-on-ones for, say, a short duration of time, the 45 minutes, 60 minutes, doesn't always allow you to get deep enough, right, working together to get to some of the things that create the action plans. So I also see that as not only a trend, but something I provide in my business. Let's actually carve out focused time together and really go deep and work through some things together, get some goals, and then we can help work on executing them over the course of weeks or months or things of that nature. The other is creating group, what I call more group healing type environments. So there are retreats and there are like group coaching and things of that nature. But one of the things that I'm looking to do is kind of bring those together. So there's a coaching element, but there's also a healing element. And it really is focused on safety. So how do we create environments that individuals feel safe to start releasing those things that they may have been holding on to in a container that is really sacred? And so I think that's something that is out there. What I've seen is this opportunity, though, to bring both of those elements, what I call kind of the intellectual and the intuition kind of and the healing together. Because too, what I find, and probably because I was in corporate so long, we want the emotional, we want the maybe even the spiritual stuff, but there's still that part of like, then what? How do we execute? How do we integrate? Right?
That's
so
true.
I think there's that part of this was great and I got all this stuff out, but then what do I do with it? So I think it's important to give that part of it so people feel like they can integrate it into their lives, they can keep going, it can be sustainable. So those are a few. And just to share too, because I kind of talked a bit about it, the work that I do is fully custom. So clients and I work together to figure out of all the things that, I have to offer, what's going to work best for them. So many times it's a combination of the coaching, some energy work, meditation, even looking at other elements of their health and wellness so that we look holistically at what they desire along with whatever goals or, tasks that they're looking to achieve. And so I do that through immersive retreats, personal retreats. So I don't do group retreats right now. That's a desire, but I do personal retreats. So those can be 1 day to 3 days where we come together and you go through that experience. I am starting to do what's called life strategy sessions. So if individuals are going through a transition, right, and maybe you just want the strategic part of like, I'm retiring or I want to go into another career, or I'm actually shifting like I shifted, right? I'm going from corporate into a whole nother world, whether it's coaching or spirituality. And I just want someone to help me kind of put my head around what all this looks like. So I have some strategy that I can work from. So that's something I'm actually offering as a new offering. And then the long term, 6 to 12 months, fully packaged, we're on the journey together and, we figure out what that looks like for you.
Wow, thank you so much, Nichole. I really enjoyed talking to you. I can talk to you for the next 100
you.
years.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for you following your calling and purpose and creating this space. I just want to honor you before we close, because if people like you hadn't really surrendered to their call, we wouldn't be on this call. So I just thank you for you doing that work as well.
Well, thank you for helping others, because I know that a lot of people don't understand, especially certain race. When you talk about grief, you talk about anxiety, you talk about this thing, they just say something is wrong with you. There's nothing. This thing doesn't exist, but it does exist. When you have someone like you, that some people might not want therapists, they might not want a psychologist, but having like a coach, someone that can guide them to it in a faster way as well is helpful. So keep doing what you are doing. It's important.
Thank you so much.